In the ancient Near East, texts emerged linked to Semitic groups settled between Egypt, Canaan, and Mesopotamia. Their transmission began in oral form and gradually transformed into written records encompassing laws, covenants, genealogies, political conflicts, and religious reorganizations. Each document reflects a particular context, marked by displacements, subjugations, or tribal structures. Over time, these writings were copied, arranged, and adapted to new circumstances without losing their original core. Through various empires, they were preserved by means of scribal schools, codified rituals, and normative practices. The content is not limited to the religious sphere. It also records social structures, judicial processes, health codes, leadership successions, and political decisions under foreign occupation. The collection offers a continuous sequence that begins with a primitive worldview and culminates in organized structures under imperial control. What truly happened according to the Holy Scriptures when they are followed in their own order. In the beginning. In a period preceding all historical reference, biblical tradition places the creation of the universe. The text describes the emergence of light, the separation of the waters, the formation of the stars, vegetation, and animals. In the final stage, according to the narrated sequence, the figure of the human being is introduced, created with a specific function of dominion over the earth. The human is presented as a pair, male and female, placed in a space called Eden. There, according to the account, they are granted free access to all resources with a single restriction: not to approach a particular tree. Disobedience to that restriction leads to a rupture. A dialogue is described with a figure identified as a serpent who persuades them to defy the command they received. In doing so, a sequence of consequences is set in motion. Access to the garden is revoked, labor becomes burdensome, and human existence is exposed to death. That moment is presented as the beginning of a separation between humanity and its creator. From that point onward, the text introduces the descendants of the initial couple. The first of them commits a homicide against his own brother. A genealogy then unfolds, spanning several centuries, in which the population multiplies, as does violence. As generations progress, a man named Noah is mentioned, described as different in his conduct compared to his surroundings. At that time, the text indicates that corruption had become widespread. A decision is then presented to eliminate the population through a catastrophic event, preserving only Noah, his family, and various animals. A large vessel is constructed, whose duration and dimensions are specified in detail. The episode ends with a flood that covers the Earth's surface for many days, followed by a process of the waters progressively receding. When the event concludes, it is indicated that humanity begins to expand again from the descendants of Noah. These descendants disperse and form groups with different languages. In one of the following scenes, the construction of a tower in the region of Shinar is recounted. The stated goal was to reach the heavens and prevent dispersion. According to the text, that intention provoked an intervention that confused the languages, halted the construction, and scattered the builders. The place was named Babel. The subsequent genealogy connects the builders of the tower with a man named Abram. Thus, a transition is established between the earliest times and the emergence of a central figure for the following stages. Patriarchs and covenants. After the dispersion at Babel, the text focuses on a man originally from Ur of the Chaldeans. His name is Abram. He lives in a polytheistic environment and is called to leave his land for an unspecified place. He is promised that his descendants will be numerous, that he will receive a region as a possession, and that he will be a source of blessing for other peoples. He obeys without knowing the final destination. He travels through various regions, Canaan, Egypt, and the Negev. In each movement, altars are established and stages of the journey are marked. Abram and his wife Sarai have no children. In an attempt to secure offspring, Sarai suggests that her servant Hagar have a child with her husband. Thus Ishmael is born. Later it is reaffirmed that the promised descendants will come through Sarai, who receives a new name, Sarah. Abram becomes Abraham. A covenant is established with a physical sign, circumcision. The covenant defines mutual commitments and is affirmed as permanent. Over time, Sarah gives birth to a son named Isaac. The birth occurs when Abraham is of advanced age. Ishmael is separated and develops apart. The text then narrates an episode in which Abraham receives a command to sacrifice Isaac. Although he ultimately does not carry out the act, the event marks a pivotal moment in the building of the relationship between the character and his God. The covenant is reaffirmed, and it is specified that it will be inherited by Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah and has two sons, Esau and Jacob. The first is the firstborn, but the second receives the patriarchal blessing through a maneuver in which Rebekah intervenes. This creates a family conflict that leads to Jacob's escape. On the way, he has a nighttime vision in which the promise made to his ancestors is reiterated. He arrives in the land of his uncle Laban, where he works for several years in exchange for wives and livestock. Jacob forms a large family with 4 women. He has 12 sons and at least 1 daughter. The names of his sons will later become references for the groups that will form the people of Israel. On a certain night, Jacob has a symbolic encounter in which he wrestles with an unidentified figure. At the end of the episode, he receives a new name, Israel. This designation becomes central in the subsequent texts. One of Jacob's sons, named Joseph, receives special treatment. His brothers reject him out of envy and sell him to some merchants. These merchants take him to Egypt, where he goes through various stages: slavery, imprisonment, and later, promotion to an important position in Pharaoh's administration. During a time of scarcity, his brothers travel to Egypt in search of food. A progressive reunion takes place. Eventually, Jacob moves with his entire family to that country where they settle. Before his death, Jacob speaks specific words to each of his sons. He then dies and is buried in Canaan. Later, Joseph also dies. The chapter concludes with the presence of Jacob's descendants established in Egypt, setting the stage for the emergence of a new phase: the Exodus and the Law. The group that descended to Egypt from Canaan multiplies over time. The text states that after several generations, a new pharaoh rises to power who does not remember Joseph. This ruler perceives the Hebrews as a demographic and political threat. In response, he imposes forced labor and orders measures to control their growth. One of these measures consists of eliminating newborn males. In that context, a Hebrew child is born and hidden for several months. He is then placed in a basket and set afloat on the Nile River. He is found by the Pharaoh's daughter, who adopts him and gives him the name Moses. Moses grows up within the royal environment but retains his Hebrew identity. Witnessing the oppression of his people, he intervenes on one occasion and kills an Egyptian. This forces him to flee to the desert. In Midian, he joins a local family, marries, and becomes a shepherd. There on a mountain, he has an experience described as a divine appearance in the midst of a bush that burns without being consumed. He is tasked with returning to Egypt to liberate his people. Moses raises objections, but ultimately accepts. Accompanied by his brother Aaron, he presents himself before the Pharaoh with a request for liberation. This is repeatedly denied. What follows is a sequence of phenomena that affect the country. The water becomes unfit, plagues strike animals, crops, and people. Each event is preceded by a warning, and after each one the Pharaoh gives in and then retracts. The final phenomenon is the death of the firstborn. That night the Hebrews follow specific instructions. They sacrifice a lamb, mark their homes, and prepare to depart. This action is recorded as a commemorative rite. After that event, the Hebrews begin their departure. They carry their belongings and leave under guidance. A path opens through a large body of water while the Egyptian army pursues them. When the passage closes, the pursuers vanish. The group ventures into the desert. Soon, tensions arise due to lack of water and food. Extraordinary provisions are established: water drawn from a rock, food gathered each morning. Rules also emerge regarding rest and social organization. At Mount Sinai, Moses ascends to receive instructions. What follows is the delivery of a set of commands that regulate religious, social, judicial, and moral aspects. The laws include provisions on worship, festivals, justice, and personal relationships. Additionally, the construction of a portable structure is ordered: the tabernacle with dimensions and materials specified in detail. A priestly system is also established, headed by Aaron and his descendants, with detailed rituals and periods of purification. During Moses' absence, some among the people create a metal figure and present it as a deity. Upon his return, Moses reacts harshly. The commandments are renewed, and the organizational process resumes. The structure of the camp is defined, the tribes receive specific locations and functions, new laws are issued, and provisions regarding sacrifice, purity, and justice are clarified. In this period, constant complaints are reported. Some question the leadership, others express dissatisfaction with the food or travel conditions. One incident records 12 men exploring the Promised Land. 10 return with an unfavorable report. That widespread reaction triggers a decision. The group will not enter the land, but will remain in the desert for several decades until the initial generation has passed away. In the final stretch, preparations for succession are made. Moses imparts his knowledge and entrusts the continuity to Joshua. The laws are reviewed. It is emphasized that faithfulness will be the condition for remaining in the Promised Land. Moses ascends a mountain from which he observes the territory, but he does not enter. There, his leadership cycle ends. With his death, one stage closes and the way is opened for the next phase under new leadership: land, conquests, and judges. After the death of Moses, leadership of the Hebrew group passes to Joshua. A new stage begins, focused on the entry into and occupation of the Promised Land. The first action is the crossing of the Jordan River. The text states that the waters stop and allow passage on dry ground. A camp is established at Gilgal, and circumcision is performed on those born in the desert. A festival is also commemorated, marking the end of manna as a daily food source. The first city faced is Jericho. An unconventional strategy is set. The people circle the city for several days in silence, and on the final day, they repeat the action several times, using instruments of sound. The walls collapse and the city is taken. Strict rules about plunder are established. One man disobeys and is punished. That disobedience affects the next military operation, prompting internal reassessment. The campaigns continue southward and then northward. The cities are faced one by one. Some local groups attempt alliances, others resist. Confrontations vary in length and intensity. The text presents the conquests as acts under mandate, but also notes that certain peoples were not fully displaced. Over time, the lands are distributed among the tribes by lot. Each group receives a specific region, except the tribe of Levi, which is given assigned cities without its own territory. Joshua gathers the tribes and reviews the events from the Exodus onward. The covenant is recalled, and the people are urged to maintain faithfulness. After his death, a period marked by instability begins. Unified leadership disappears, and a decentralized tribal structure forms. In this context, figures identified as judges arise. These are not judges in the modern legal sense, but charismatic leaders who act during moments of crisis. Throughout this period, a repeated pattern is observed. The people abandon established norms, fall under foreign domination, cry out for help, and are guided by a temporary leader. This leader heads the recovery, and after their death, the cycle begins again. Some of the judges mentioned are Othniel, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. Each acts in a different period and faces specific enemies: Midianites, Philistines, Ammonites, among others. During this time, there is no central government structure. Each tribe acts autonomously, and sometimes in isolation. The text states that in that period, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It also includes episodes that show internal conflicts between tribes and social deterioration. One of these episodes involves a conflict between the tribe of Benjamin and the rest, leading to a civil war with severe consequences. Alongside this, the lives of some families during that time are described. One such account tells of a family's displacement from Bethlehem to Moab due to a famine. There, the head of the family dies, and years later, his widow returns accompanied by her Moabite daughter-in-law. This woman, named Ruth, integrates into the people and eventually marries a distant relative. From that union, a son is born, whose grandson will be David, the future king. The story is inserted as a transition between the tribal period and the emergence of a monarchy. At the end of this stage, the text describes a general situation of political and religious disorder. The need for stable leadership is perceived. In response, the figure of a final judge is introduced, who also serves as a prophet. His name is Samuel. He is presented as a man of integrity who acts as an intermediary during a moment of institutional change, kings and division. At the beginning of this period, the Hebrew population lives amid external threats and internal disorganization. The leadership of Samuel, the last judge, maintains a degree of stability, but does not resolve the collective desire for a central figure with permanent authority. The tribes request a king, as is common among neighboring peoples. Samuel expresses reservations, but conveys the request. The response received indicates that it is not a human leader being rejected, but rather the existing structure. Eventually, the appointment of a king is approved, with warnings about the institutional consequences. The first king appointed is Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin. He is recognized for his height and military ability. In his initial actions, he leads successful defensive campaigns. However, the account notes episodes in which he disobeys specific instructions, leading to his rejection as a legitimate figure. From that point on, Samuel is instructed to anoint another future king. This is a young shepherd named David, the youngest son in a family from the tribe of Judah. While Saul still reigns, David joins the army and gains public acclaim. His confrontation with a Philistine warrior named Goliath marks a turning point. As his popularity increases, so does the tension with the king. Saul attempts to eliminate him on multiple occasions. David flees, forms a group of followers, and lives in remote territories. After the deaths of Saul and his son Jonathan in battle, David is proclaimed king, first in Hebron and later in Jerusalem. David establishes a political and religious capital. He transfers a sacred object to Jerusalem, unifies the tribes, and expands the territory through military campaigns. He also forges diplomatic alliances. During his reign, family tensions arise that lead to internal conflicts. One of his sons organizes a rebellion, forcing the king to temporarily leave the city. The revolt is suppressed, but the episode leaves a mark on the kingdom's stability. Toward the end of his life, David organizes the succession. His son Solomon is appointed heir. Once consolidated in power, Solomon begins a period of economic expansion and architectural projects. The most notable is the Temple in Jerusalem. Its construction uses materials from various regions and involves specialized workers. It becomes a center for rituals, festivals, and priestly organization. Solomon also establishes relations with foreign powers and develops a complex administrative network. During his reign, forced labor and high tribute policies are implemented. These measures generate discontent, although they remain under control. After his death, the situation changes. His son Rehoboam inherits the throne but adopts an inflexible stance toward popular demands. The result is the fragmentation of the kingdom. 10 tribes separate and form a new northern kingdom called Israel, with its capital in Samaria. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin remain in the south, with Jerusalem as their center. From that moment on, the narrative splits into 2 parallel lines. In the north, kings are chosen through irregular mechanisms, often by means of coups. In the south, the Davidic dynasty continues uninterrupted. Both kingdoms face external threats, internal instability, and religious conflicts. In Israel, the capital changes location several times before being permanently established. Some kings promote the worship of foreign deities, which creates tensions with prophetic groups. In Judah, periods of religious centralization alternate with others marked by syncretism. Figures such as Asa, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and Josiah attempt reforms, while other administrations tolerate practices contrary to the original norms. In both kingdoms, critical voices arise denouncing social and religious conduct. These prophets act as opponents and warners. Their message is not limited to worship, but also addresses themes such as justice, equity, and faithfulness to the covenant. Contacts with regional empires increase. Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon exert pressure on both kingdoms. Some rulers try to resist through alliances, others through tribute. Strategies vary, but the common outcome is growing dependence on foreign powers. Stability weakens. In the north, Irregular succession and ongoing conflicts make external intervention easier. In the south, although the dynasty endures, autonomy becomes increasingly restricted. This period concludes with two different outcomes. Israel, the northern kingdom, falls to Assyria. A large portion of its population is displaced, and other communities are settled in its territory. The original identity becomes diluted. Judah, the southern kingdom, holds out longer but also faces a mounting threat from Babylon. Attempts at resistance, internal reforms, and prophetic warnings fail to reverse the trend. With the destruction of Jerusalem and the deportation of a significant part of its population, a historical stage marked by monarchy, centralized worship, and national life in a sovereign land comes to an end. For the first time, the people find themselves without a temple, without a king, and without land. Prophets, conflicts, and downfall. With the division of the kingdoms, the role of the prophets takes on a new dimension. They no longer act solely as messengers, but also as critical figures, intervening in social, political, and religious matters. Some speak during times of relative peace, others deliver their messages amid wars, alliances, or internal crises. Their messages, almost always initially rejected, are preserved in writing and constitute a significant section of the biblical content. In the northern kingdom, figures such as Elijah and Elisha arise. Both confront monarchs who promote the worship of foreign deities. Elijah openly challenges the priests of Baal and confronts King Ahab. Elisha succeeds him and continues with warnings and attributed miracles. Despite these interventions, the political structures in the north deteriorate. Violent successions, unstable alliances, and the weakening of central authority pave the way for Assyrian intervention. The year Samaria falls is marked as the end of the northern kingdom. The tribes that formed it are deported. In their place, foreign groups are settled. The region never regains an independent Hebrew identity. The mixed population adopts different customs and is viewed with suspicion by those who later return from exile. This process is known as the disappearance of the 10 tribes. Meanwhile, in the southern kingdom, changes unfold over a longer period. Some kings implement religious reforms, such as Hezekiah and Josiah. The former attempts to centralize worship in Jerusalem and eliminate alternative sanctuaries. The latter finds an ancient text during temple renovations, which triggers a campaign of religious renewal. However, neither effort succeeds in altering the long-term political trajectory. The international context shifts rapidly. Assyria weakens, and Babylon rises as the dominant power. Judah becomes trapped between major empires. Some kings attempt submission through tribute, while others rebel. Resistance provokes reprisals. The first deportation occurs under King Jehoiakim. Part of the elite, including artisans, scribes, and nobles, is taken to Babylon. A new monarch is installed under Babylonian supervision. During this period, the prophet Jeremiah is active, advising against rebellion and calling for pragmatic surrender. His message isolates him. The refusal to comply with Babylonian conditions leads to a renewed offensive. This time, Jerusalem is besieged and destroyed. The temple is set on fire. Sacred objects are taken as spoils. King Zedekiah attempts to flee but is captured. A significant portion of the population is deported. Only a small, impoverished group remains. The appointed governor is assassinated, prompting the flight of those who had stayed behind. During the exile, some prophets begin to interpret events in a structured way. Ezekiel, from Babylon, receives visions concerning restoration. He describes an ideal temple and a future distribution of land. Isaiah, in a second section attributed to a later period, announces the return as an act authorized by a new power, Persia. This new interpretation links the downfall not only to military factors, but also to internal causes. Life in exile is not described in detail, but efforts to maintain identity are noted. Texts are preserved, meeting spaces are organized, and belonging is reaffirmed through dietary practices, calendars, and communal regulations. Some individuals attain prominent positions in the Babylonian administration. Daniel is one of them. His activity combines dream interpretation with steadfastness against imposed rules. The narratives depict him alongside companions who reject certain practices, face consequences, and survive. With the expansion of Persia and the fall of Babylon, a new stage begins. Cyrus, the Persian king, issues a decree allowing the exiles to return to Jerusalem. This permission does not imply independence, but it does grant religious freedom. The return is organized in several stages. The goal is to rebuild the temple and reconstitute the community. Not all return. Some remain in Babylon, where they had already established themselves. The reconstruction of the temple faces opposition from neighboring peoples. There are also internal difficulties. The work progresses slowly. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah encourage the people to resume the project. Eventually, the structure is completed, though it lacks the former splendor. Later, Ezra arrives with an additional group. He focuses on teaching the law and consolidating identity. Then Nehemiah, with Persian authorization, rebuilds the walls and organizes administrative matters. During this period, reforms are enacted that affect daily life. Marriages with people from neighboring nations are prohibited. The study of the written text is reinforced as a foundation of cohesion. Worship is centralized. Practices are introduced that will later become characteristic, such as public reading of the law and the development of a specialized class in its interpretation. This period closes the narrative cycle that began with the monarchy. Although the people return to their land, they no longer possess independence or a king of their own. The temple exists, but under foreign oversight. The organization now revolves around the law, the priesthood, and the dispersed community. The expectation of a complete restoration remains open. Return and restoration. With the rise of the Persian Empire, a decisive change occurs in the situation of the exiles. Cyrus, king of Persia, decrees that deported peoples may return to their territories and rebuild their temples. The document authorizing this action is recognized by local authorities. In this context, a group of Jews organizes to return to Jerusalem. The leader of the first caravan is Zerubbabel, a descendant of the royal house of Judah. He is accompanied by a group composed of priests, Levites, artisans, and families. Upon arrival, they find a city in ruins, with destroyed walls and no temple. Reconstruction of the altar's foundations begins, and some sacrifices are reinstated. However, the work does not progress immediately. Opposition from neighboring populations, combined with lack of resources and discouragement, causes the project to stall. During this period, daily activities resume, but the temple remains unfinished. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah intervene in this context. Both encourage the resumption of the work, appealing to the urgency of fulfilling the original mandate. With support from new Persian authorities, construction resumes. Eventually, the temple is completed and dedicated, though with less splendor than the previous one. Those who had known the former building remember it with nostalgia, while the generations born in exile receive it as a sign of restoration. After some time, a new group arrives from Babylon. It is led by Ezra, a scribe well versed in the law. His focus is not on construction, but on regulation. Upon arrival, he finds that part of the population has formed family ties with neighboring peoples. He considers this practice a threat to religious identity. Based on this assessment, he promotes a process of separation. Community structures are reorganized, legal texts are read publicly, and priestly authority is reinforced. Years later, another official authorized by Persia arrives with a specific mission: to rebuild the city walls. His name is Nehemiah. Upon surveying the city, he identifies many failures in its defenses and administration. He mobilizes the population in a project coordinated by sectors. He faces external opposition and sabotage attempts. However, he manages to complete the work in a short period. The city regains a functional perimeter, though its security does not depend solely on physical structures. Nehemiah also identifies irregular practices within the community. He denounces the misuse of temple spaces, economic exploitation, and lack of observance of the day of rest. He implements corrections, replaces officials, and reinstates regulations. Together with Ezra, he organizes a public ceremony in which the law is read over several days. The event includes explanations, confessions, and collective commitments. A document is written to record those agreements. From that moment on, the identity of the people centers around three pillars: the legal text, the priesthood, and cultural separation. The study of the scriptures is promoted, specific functions are assigned to priestly families, and the distinction from other peoples is reinforced. This model is maintained even outside Jerusalem, where alternative spaces for gathering and teaching begin to emerge. The population remains under Persian rule. A monarchy is not established, nor is political autonomy achieved. The organization revolves around religious leaders and local officials. Worship in the temple continues, though under economic limitations. The tributes and controls imposed by Persia shape daily life. Even so, a way of life is consolidated that allows identity to be preserved without the need for territorial sovereignty. Toward the end of this period, a relative stability is perceived. No new prophecies are recorded in the immediate aftermath. The prophetic activity, central in earlier periods, declines. Emphasis shifts to the interpretation and teaching of the written text. The visible figures are no longer messengers, but scribes, priests, and community leaders. This cultural and religious model is the one that will face the challenges of the following centuries. The people remain in their land, but as a province of a foreign empire. No new recorded revelations occur. Traditions are preserved through reading, teaching, and repetition. Thus, the stage of restoration concludes not as a full return to a previous state, but as an adaptation to a new reality. 4 centuries in silence. After the period of restoration under Persian rule, no new prophetic messages or events included in the Hebrew biblical canon are recorded. This time span covers approximately 4 centuries. During this interval, the people of Judah remain under foreign control, adapting their internal structures while facing cultural, political, and religious transformations resulting from shifts in imperial dominance. Persian rule continues for nearly 200 years. During that time, Jerusalem functions as a relatively stable province. Local administration is managed by high priests, whose authority is recognized by the central government. Religious practices continue regularly, although limited by available resources and subject to imperial oversight. Collective identity is preserved through the teaching of the law, synagogue life outside Jerusalem, and the reinforcement of communal norms. With the military expansion of Alexander the Great, the Persian Empire falls and Macedonian rule is imposed. After Alexander's death, his generals divide the conquered territory. Palestine initially comes under the control of the Ptolemies based in Egypt, and later the Seleucids based in Syria. During these transitions, Greek culture is gradually introduced. Theatres, gymnasiums, and Greek-language schools are built. Part of the population adopts these elements, another part rejects them. The conflict intensifies under the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He forcibly imposes foreign cultural practices, prohibits Hebrew religious observances, and defiles the temple in Jerusalem by introducing Greek cults. In response, a revolt arises, led by a priestly family, the Maccabees. The conflict evolves into a prolonged war. Eventually, the insurgents succeed in retaking Jerusalem, purifying the temple, and restoring worship. This episode gives rise to an annual commemoration. Following the victory, the revolt's leaders assume political control. A priestly dynasty with royal authority is formed, known as the Hasmoneans. For several decades, the Hebrew people enjoy relative independence. The temple resumes full operation, coins are minted, and diplomatic alliances are established. However, internal divisions and succession disputes threaten stability. Amid these disputes, Rome intervenes. General Pompey conquers Jerusalem and establishes control over the region. Although some religious autonomy is permitted, effective governance is handed over to Roman-appointed authorities. The figure of Herod emerges, identified as king but subordinate to Roman power. His rule combines public works with political repression. He orders the expansion of the temple and the remodeling of Jerusalem, but also suppresses opposition and consolidates power in himself. During this time, no new prophetic texts are officially recognized. Religious activity is organized around the temple, but also extends to other spaces. Different groups with diverse approaches emerge. The Pharisees promote oral law and study. The Sadducees control the temple. The Essenes withdraw and form closed communities. The Zealots advocate for armed resistance. While they share some common elements, they maintain doctrinal and social differences. The expectation of a future intervention remains alive. Some texts written during this period express hope for a complete restoration. Others interpret current events as signs of fulfillment. These ideas are not uniformly expressed in public, but they circulate among different sectors of the population. The use of symbols, numbers, and visions becomes frequent in writings not included in the official canon. By the end of these centuries, the territory remains under Roman control. The temple still stands, but sovereignty has vanished. The law is studied, but disagreements about its application are widespread. The priesthood exists, but its legitimacy is questioned. The memory of the past, the weight of the present, and the expectation of the future combine in a tense atmosphere. In this context, new figures emerge who will alter the course of events. The life of Jesus. During the reign of Herod in Judea, a couple from Galilee travels to Bethlehem in response to a census decree issued by the Roman authorities. In this context, a child named Jesus is born. The account notes that no lodging is available and that the birth occurs in humble conditions. Shortly afterward, it is reported that the local ruler, upon hearing rumors of a possible rival to the throne, orders the execution of infants in the region. The family escapes to Egypt. Later, upon returning, they settle in the city of Nazareth. No detailed information is preserved about Jesus' early years, except for one episode at 12 years of age in the Temple of Jerusalem. He reappears publicly around the age of 30 when he approaches John, a preacher in the desert proclaiming the need for repentance. John baptizes those who come to him and announces the arrival of someone greater. Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River. Shortly after, he withdraws into the desert for 40 days, where he faces a series of trials. Upon returning, he begins to travel through the regions of Galilee and Judea. He calls several men to follow him. These men leave their occupations and accompany him on his journeys. He teaches in synagogues, speaks in open spaces, answers questions, and uses everyday life comparisons. He also performs actions interpreted as signs, healings, exorcisms, provision of food, and control over natural phenomena. His presence elicits diverse reactions. Some follow him, others watch with suspicion. Among the established religious sectors, questions arise, not about his origin, but about his interpretation of the law, his interactions with marginalized people, and his authority to act without belonging to traditional circles. On several occasions, he is challenged regarding Sabbath observance, contact with the sick, and the forgiveness of sins. Despite this, he continues his activity without interruption. Throughout his journey, he frequently refers to a concept he calls the kingdom. He does not present it as a political structure, but as an unfolding reality. He describes this kingdom through examples, warnings, and promises. On many occasions, he states that access to it does not depend on lineage or external merits. He also warns of judgment, rejection, and the consequences of indifference. He gathers a small group of disciples whom he instructs more closely. He explains certain teachings privately, sends them out to practice what they have learned, and foretells future events. He mentions that he will be handed over, rejected, and executed. He also affirms that after a short time, he will live again. These statements are not immediately understood. The group maintains expectations of a different nature, linked to a national restoration. On his journey to Jerusalem, Jesus receives popular support but is also closely watched. Upon entering the city, he expels merchants from the temple. This act provokes a coordinated reaction from the religious authorities. Questions are arranged to trap him. He does not respond directly, but uses stories with clear implications. The tension rises. One of his followers agrees to identify him in exchange for a reward. During a meal held with his disciples, Jesus anticipates his death and establishes a shared symbol using bread and wine. Afterwards, he withdraws to a secluded place to pray. There he is arrested. He is brought before religious authorities and then before the Roman governor. Interrogations are conducted, accusations are presented, and a sentence is ultimately issued. The governor finds no guilt according to Roman law, but yields to local pressure. Jesus is scourged, publicly displayed, and taken to an execution site outside the city. The punishment applied is crucifixion. For several hours, he remains hanging on a wooden structure. Eventually, he dies. His body is taken down and placed in a tomb owned by a sympathizer. Guards are assigned to the site. On the third day, several women approach the tomb and find it empty. They report what has happened. Some disciples visit and confirm the account. In the following days, various groups claim to have seen him alive. These encounters take place under different circumstances and in various locations. In them, Jesus appears, speaks, and gives instructions. He indicates that they should not remain in Jerusalem, but wait for a later intervention. Then, according to the texts, he ascends until he disappears. His followers remain gathered, awaiting the promised manifestation. The public life of Jesus spanned a brief period, but left an extensive record. His activity was not limited to the religious sphere. It involved ethical teachings, social challenges, and a new frame of reference for those who followed him. From his death onward, a different stage begins, in which his followers begin to act without his physical presence, but guided by what they believe they have received directly: the expansion of the church. After the physical disappearance of Jesus, his followers remain gathered in Jerusalem. According to the account, during a Jewish festival, an event occurs that they interpret as a spiritual manifestation. A group of disciples begins to speak in various languages, attracting the attention of the crowd. Peter, one of the group's main figures, explains the situation using ancient texts. That day, several hundred people join the community. The initial organization develops within the city. The followers meet in homes, share meals and teachings, and distribute resources equitably. A connection with the temple is maintained, but a distinct structure also begins to form. Some disciples perform healings and deliver public speeches. These actions attract attention, but also provoke opposition from religious authorities. On several occasions, they are arrested, interrogated, and released with warnings. One emerging leader, Stephen, is accused of speaking against the temple and the law. He is brought before a council, where he delivers a defense that recounts the history of the Hebrew people. At its conclusion, he is executed by stoning. This episode marks the beginning of broader persecution. As a result, several followers disperse to other regions. This displacement does not halt the spread of the message. Rather, it extends it to new cities. In this context, a figure emerges who initially acts as a persecutor. His name is Saul, a Roman citizen and expert in the law. During a journey to Damascus, he experiences an event that leads him to reconsider his position. From that moment on, he embraces the message he once opposed. He changes his name to Paul and begins to actively participate in the movement's expansion. His inclusion initially causes distrust, but over time he is accepted. As the message reaches non-Jewish communities, internal tensions arise. Some argue that newcomers must adopt traditional legal norms. Others believe adherents should focus on the core of the message. A meeting is convened in Jerusalem to resolve the issue. After deliberation, it is decided that it is not necessary to impose all previous practices. This decision allows for broader expansion. Paul undertakes several journeys through Asia Minor and the Mediterranean. He visits cities, establishes communities, and maintains contact with them through letters. In each location, he encounters varying responses: acceptance, indifference, or rejection. At times he is arrested. In others, he manages to organize stable gatherings. He adapts his message to the context while preserving its central elements. He collaborates with others, delegates responsibilities, and structures roles within the communities. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the situation becomes increasingly tense. The relationship with both the religious authorities and the Roman power deteriorates. James, a prominent figure among the believers, is executed. Many followers leave the city. The temple remains operational, but political and social tensions rise. A revolt against Rome leads to a military response. During the war, Rome besieges Jerusalem. After several months, the city falls. The temple is destroyed and is never rebuilt. This event marks a decisive transformation. The centrality of the temple disappears. Worship shifts to synagogues and homes. For the followers of Jesus, the temple is no longer indispensable. Communities organize as a network, united by shared teachings and the memory of foundational events. Paul is arrested in Jerusalem and taken to Rome. He remains in custody, though with some freedom of movement. From there, he continues writing to the communities. Eventually, he dies under circumstances not described in detail. Peter also travels to Rome and becomes a central figure in the local community. His death is attributed to a persecution under Emperor Nero. Over time, other leaders take on roles of guidance and teaching. The early communities maintain common elements: reading of texts, prayer, shared meals, and mutual care. Over time, writings that circulate among them are compiled. Some record teachings, others recount events. Letters are written to provide guidance on behavior, beliefs, and organization. These texts form the foundation of what will later be recognized as part of the canon. Despite the absence of formal structures, the communities manage to sustain themselves. In each city, leaders are appointed. Some focus on teaching, others on administration. Mechanisms for resolving disputes are developed. Persecutions are not constant, but they are recurrent. Some rulers authorize them, others ignore them. Believers are accused of subversion or of rejecting official cults. During this period, geographic expansion accelerates. The message reaches regions in Asia, North Africa, and Southern Europe. Cultural diversity requires adaptation in forms of expression. Nevertheless, the core elements remain: the central figure of Jesus, the hope in his return, and the call to a different way of life. The separation from Judaism deepens. Initially, they were seen as part of the same tradition. Over time, they become distinct groups. As this stage ends, the organization has evolved. From a small group in Jerusalem, it has grown into a widespread network. Without a temple, without a state, and without legal protection, the communities endure through memory, text, and practice. The subsequent development will be built upon this foundation. Visions of the future. In the final section of the biblical text appears a document attributed to a man named John, identified as a servant of the persecuted communities. He is in exile on an island called Patmos during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. There he claims to receive a revelation through visions. The content, written as messages to 7 communities located in Asia Minor, combines exhortations, warnings, and descriptions of future events. The communities mentioned face various challenges. Some resist under pressure, others have compromised with external practices. Each receives a specific message indicating actions to correct and attitudes to uphold. A reward is promised to those who persevere. Following that introduction, the author presents a sequence of visions. These do not unfold in a linear narrative, but through symbols, numbers, and figures representing forces or entities. Among the highlighted elements are a throne surrounded by creatures, a scroll sealed with 7 seals, and a lamb who alone is worthy to open it. Each seal opened unleashes an event on earth. Then come 7 trumpets, each announcing calamities. Later, a confrontation is described involving figures identified as beasts, dragons, and witnesses. Signs in the sky, persecution of believers, and manifestations of judgment are also mentioned. Despite the text's symbolic nature, certain themes recur. One is the conflict between justice and corruption. Another is the endurance of a group that does not yield. A central figure also emerges, appearing with different attributes: lamb, rider, or judge. The narrative reaches moments of crisis where evil appears dominant, but then a definitive intervention is anticipated. In one of the final passages, the fall of a city identified as Babylon is described. This does not necessarily refer to the historical city, but symbolizes oppressive power. After its fall, the justice of judgment is proclaimed. A new figure on a white horse appears, accompanied by armies. This figure confronts and defeats the opposing forces. Then, a period of peace is mentioned, followed by a final confrontation. The document concludes with a vision of restoration. A new city appears, where there is no temple because the divine presence fills all. A river flows from the center, and trees produce constant fruit. There is no death, no mourning, and no pain. The separation between the human and the divine disappears. The city is inhabited by those who have remained faithful. Its gates remain open, and there is no night. The work ends with a declaration affirming the authenticity of the revelation. It calls for maintaining hope, not altering the message, and waiting for the fulfillment of what has been promised. No date is given, nor is a specific timeline defined. What is offered is not a concrete prediction, but a closing proclamation that leaves the reader before an unfulfilled yet upheld promise. This writing is not addressed only to its own time. Although it emerges from a specific context of persecution, its language allows for interpretation across many eras. That ambiguity has contributed to its endurance. The use of numbers like 7, 12, and 1000, the mention of seals, trumpets, and bowls, and the multitude of figures have all been the subject of various interpretations. However, the text does not offer internal keys that define a single way of reading it. With this work, the canonical sequence of the biblical text comes to a close. No later documents are unanimously accepted as part of the collection. The Bible concludes not with a literal resolution of the historical conflict, but with an affirmation of continuity beyond the immediate. What began with creation ends with restoration.